Hey everyone, it's me, Brad. In case you don't recognize me, I was the guy doing studio visits with some of you before. Well, before I wrote this talk, I was thinking about all the talks that I've been to when I was in school, when I was an undergrad and grad, and how some of them were, some of the people were better orators than others, and some of the people were better artists than others, but the one thing all the talks had in common was that they were all a chance for the artists to speak about the history of the art they've made, but not actually talk about their career in art, right? A career in art is something you have to make with other people who curate your art and sell it and write articles about it, who attend your openings and buy it from you. It's a messy social process, which is probably why you don't hear many artists or teachers talk about it, because it's a lot more pleasant to speak in platitudes about the meaning of your work than the embarrassing, conniving, self-promotional reality of how a career in art gets made. I remember when I was in school, all I wanted was for a guest speaker to go out into the art world and come back and come to my school and teach me something about the art world that I was about to enter. That's why I was paying all that money to go there. So I wrote a talk specifically for this grad environment here at Cornell titled "The Shit I Wish Someone Told Me Before I Entered the Art World," which draws on my own failures and embarrassments from being in the art world for a decade in the hopes that you don't have to fuck up in all the ways that I did. The first thing I wish someone told me is this: you don't have to communicate in art speak nonsense to be intelligent. I want to start this section by reading something aloud to you that I think we usually just read silently in our heads. The trans object is at the same time a sub-object and an extra object that opens up to a subversive micro level with the energies of its own unmaking. It is a fold or a pocket for social content, receiving warm bodies, or for gestating events, disappearing redundant images, and so a site for dealing with opposites that may not turn out to be any. Pretty painful stuff, huh? That's what art speak is. When I was in school, using International Art English like this was very attractive to me for two reasons. First, because I was supposed to put that static up when I was reading the International Art English. First, because I was insecure and I wanted to appear intelligent. I wanted people to think I was smart and worldly and bohemian. The second reason is because I was on the outside looking into an art world that was intentionally opaque at every turn. How do you get shows? How do you get collectors? How does any of this shit work? And what does art even mean? I had no idea. And in some ways, I still don't know. But what I did know was that the people who were ahead of me were speaking in a mysterious tongue. And if I could just decipher the language they were talking in, then maybe it would be the skeleton key that would unlock the art world. So, this is me, by the way, as I'm describing this. So I took the task of learning International Art English very seriously. I transferred out of the photography department at SAIC and into the visual critical studies department, the most hardcore theory department at a school full of self-serious hardcore theory people. I went to NYU's grad program because I knew I could take the majority of my classes in their media, culture, and communication department, which was an extension of the type of shit I was learning before. In grad school, I stapled printouts of the essays I needed to read on one wall of my studio and essays I've already read on the other side of my wall. It looked like a very pretentious version of the movie A Beautiful Mind. I ran a reading group in New York for 3 years so I could meet and talk with my writer heroes, people like Andrea Fraser and Boris Groys and Hito Steyerl. I wound up publishing dozens of academic sounding essays about art and social media, and I spent years of my career reading and writing this way. But at the end of all that, here's what I realized. For artists, theory is only as useful as you're able to understand it and make use of it in your own work. They don't give you a Medal of Honor for reading about shit you don't care about and can't understand. Today, when I'm writing for memes or videos or talks like this, I try to say what I mean as simply and directly as I can. If it needs more words to correctly convey what I'm thinking, then I'll use those longer words. But when I catch myself feeling like I should add longer words because I'm embarrassed of how naked I feel to say what I really mean, that's a bad reaction, and it's motivated by my own ego and my desire to appear intelligent. Because the truth is, it's very tiring to pretend to be something that you're not. And I don't know anyone who comes out of the womb speaking this way. It's very tedious to have to convert your natural instincts through a pseudoscientific word processor at all times. So, at a certain point in my career, I switched from an academic, theoretical tone in my work to using comedy, because I wanted people to understand what the fuck I was actually saying and what I meant in my work. I like the way that in comedy, if you can get somebody to laugh, you're getting a real reaction out of them. People don't think before they laugh, they just do it. It's like a sneeze. And then, after they're done laughing, they're left to figure out why they laughed. They're engaged in a brief moment of self-reflection. And it's that moment of self-reflection that I think a lot of art strives to create for viewers. But with comedy, you're able to get the viewer to that place through happiness instead of academic drudgery. I know I'm not alone in rethinking this shit, because at certain points throughout everyone's career, you have doubts about making art. And I think the question looming at the end of this existential crisis we all have when we wonder if it's worth it to make art is, who the fuck is my audience? And is my art making any impact on their life? If you can answer that question and say, I know there are probably only about 10 people in the world who understand what I'm doing, and I accept that. Making art is still worth it to me, even if there's only 10 people who get it. That's fine. You're aware of your path, and you're taking a very lonely ride through life as an artist, but I respect it. If you ask yourself the question, who the fuck is my audience, and is my art making any impact in their life? And your answer is also 10 people, but you feel bad about that. You feel like it's myopic or limiting or pointless or whatever. If you don't like the answer to that question, then take another look at the work you're making and see if it's actually a reflection of your own interests. Maybe take a look at the one chance you have to communicate the meaning of your work through your artist statement or your press release or your grad thesis, right? If you read that writing and it says something like, oh, I don't know. The hereby developed recartographing is transformed in a process of sculptural cooperation, fragmenting, and new creation of bodies, and so forms alternative worlds and body landscapes within a common referential system, then maybe you might want to consider editing that slightly. Here's the last thing I'll say about International Art English before I move on, because I mostly just talked about this as a matter of my own personal communication preference in my career. But I think that the entire academic art world speaking this way to each other has wider implications than just my preferences, right? If we look at oh, sorry. See, I keep forgetting to do the static one when I do the International Art English. If we look at the history of art's critical discourse, we used to listen to critics' personal opinions about the quality of art. And then postmodernity came along and said, all this stuff you're saying is critically objective is actually subjective. It's like, your opinion, man. International Art English replaced these subjective assessments of art's quality with a new lexicon of not quite scientific terms. International Art English always had an awkward relationship with art because it was based on a triple translation. The first step is, let's translate the phenomenological impact of visual art into the English language. That's a difficult process no matter what, right? I think that's a tough one. The second step is, but let's not just use English as we know it. Let's use French and German political theories translated to English by amateur translators often. The third step is using those English translated theories to translate visual art. You can see how this can get fucked up. If you've read a press release recently, then you know that International Art English really isn't that good at communicating art's meaning, but it is effective at telling people what your reading list is. It's more a way of communicating that you're part of the club, that you belong in an academicized art world where everyone else has their master's degree. So, if you look around today, in the absence of intelligible discourse, the art media landscape has come to rely on price as its go-to metric. All the print magazines that were formerly devoted to criticism are now wonky statistical havens for auction results and pie graphs and eye-popping sales numbers. It's crass, and it's stupid. But focusing on price makes art understandable to people in the same way that reading scores in the newspaper sports section tells you who's winning and who's losing this season. Of course, the three types of critical languages I've been describing, these were always writerly ways of mapping art. They were prescriptive languages used by columnists to describe their opinion about the real thing. The truth is, artists have always had their own way of allocating value between one another, and that's through the expression of influence. Influence is the uninterrupted discussion between artists since the beginning of time. It's the way dead and living artists communicate. Influence happens prior to art's creation, whereas all this other punditry occurs afterward. But unlike talking about prices or using International Art English, influence is always generous. To be influential offers future artists a new, more prescient way to make things, even if that work isn't understood in its own time. To demonstrate influence is a way of thanking your predecessors by carrying forward the parts of the past that belong in the future. What I'm talking about is a shift in culture that emphasizes artists communicating with each other through their work instead of using additional translation processes. I'm talking about a culture where artists strive to be influential instead of striving to appear intelligent, like I did. I'm talking about a culture where artists openly acknowledge the art that influenced them instead of locking their work away in cryptic terms. Look, being an artist is a lonely occupation in a time where I think a lot of people already feel completely atomized in society, which is why I like the idea of influence bringing about connections between artists instead of continuing to rely on International Art English, which has proven to alienate us from one another. Speaking of art as a lonely occupation, that brings me to the second thing I wish someone would have told me. You are never going to be represented by a blue chip gallery. You are never going to be represented by a blue chip gallery. I wish someone would have told me this, but I probably wouldn't have listened anyway, but I wish they would have told me anyway. I wish I would have known this fact because it would have allowed me to invest in myself and the people around me and to create art freely from the start. Every artist in America has two jobs. The first is to be an artist, obviously. The second is to figure out how you're going to support yourself so you can continue making art. Yeah, there are grants and state funding for art in other countries, but America doesn't really have that stuff, let alone a social safety net or healthcare. So this leaves you as the sole proprietor of a product that is intimately tied to your identity. And this is fucking scary because it means you've got three options. You can either make art and sell that work through art dealers. You can make art and sell it yourself. Or you can make art and get a separate job to support yourself. Maybe some of you are like me, because one of the reasons I went to grad school was because I wanted to make a living selling work through galleries. I think to some extent everyone knows the odds are stacked against you in the art market, but you want to believe that you'll be the exception to the rule. And the rule is that we are all part of a debt-fueled Ponzi scheme designed to funnel money upward in the art market. The debt pyramid looks like this. Art students are at the base of the pyramid. This is where most people are. The students pay tuition to schools, unless you're in the Cornell grad program. The schools pay adjunct teachers a low salary to teach the students. Most of these art school teachers are artists themselves, just like I was when I spent 5 years as an adjunct faculty member of several schools. The teaching salary these artists are paid subsidizes their lifelong efforts to move up the art world ladder by exhibiting at small galleries so that eventually they'll receive their income from galleries instead of teaching. Now, not all people who exhibit with small galleries have teaching jobs. Obviously, some work in other industries. Some are just born rich and are spending their inheritance trying to make it in the art world. They come from all over. But what they all are doing is subsidizing small galleries by accepting work as independent contractors instead of employees. And before you fall asleep, because it sounds like I'm filling out a tax form, just give me 30 seconds to explain this because I think it's important. It's an important distinction. When you get represented by a gallery, you don't get a salary like an employee. you get paid only for the art that sells from your solo exhibition that you do at most once a year. You get one chance per year. The gallery probably isn't going to give you a production budget, so you'll be paying for your own materials, you'll be paying for your own studio, and of course, you'll be paying for your own student loans. This is to say, if you don't make any sales, the gallery owes you nothing. This is to say that you are 100% responsible for the creation of your own gallery work, but you only receive 50% of the money made in gallery sales. The gallery has to pay rent up front, they have to pay their staff up front, and they have to pay the guy who fixes the toilet after the opening up front, but they don't have to pay the artist up front, whose work they've been showing all month. Unlike everyone else, that pay isn't up front. That pay is conditional on sales, making the artist an independent contractor instead of an employee. There is no guaranteed pay. And this is the heart of the precarity of the situation and why so many artists, including artists who already have gallery representation, have second jobs. Now, just like the artists, the galleries are also trying to move up the ladder. Galleries use the money they save by not paying artists up front to rent real estate in some of the most expensive neighborhoods in the world. They invest in expanding their sales staff. They invest it in applying and traveling to art fairs, and that's a big one. Small galleries have to expand because if they don't, their most profitable artists will leave them for a larger mid-tier gallery. Sometimes galleries complain about this as a problem that has to do with artists' lack of loyalty. But the reason artists freely hop between galleries is because they're precariously employed. So if your pay is unstable, you're going to go wherever you feel like you've got the best shot at getting paid. A mid-tier gallery is different from a small gallery in that you're given, as an artist, a production budget for your show. It's a 0% interest loan, personal loan that allows you to make bigger, better work. Maybe it allows you to work with fabricators and assistants to scale up your production in some way. This increase in production value usually means your prices are also going up, which is part of the plan to pay the gallery back for the loan they gave you. This is your tryout for the big leagues. It is your way as an artist of saying, if you give me just a little bit of money, here's what I can do. All that independent contractor shit that I was talking about with small galleries, that's all the same as in mid-tier galleries. But having a production budget does make a big difference. I know it did for me. I wouldn't have been able to do basically any of my solo shows without a production budget. I think we all know how it works from here. The largest galleries, the blue chip galleries, cannibalize the mid-tier galleries' roster for sales staff and for artists. For an artist, once you get up here, once you're represented by a blue chip gallery, you're set for life. These galleries have so many ties, monopolistically, might I add, to collectors and museums that you're guaranteed a lush income from then on out. Pretty much everyone I know who is represented by a blue chip gallery is a millionaire. So, you can see how even though this is a perilous climb, the potential for upward mobility is so enticing. So much of the market is built around this aspiration for upward mobility. So much that even with the odds stacked against you, there's a trace of rationality in entering the debt pyramid. But what if I told you the chance for upward mobility wasn't 1% or 0.5% or 0.1%? It was just straight up 0%. It's not going to happen. What if I told you you're not going to be represented by a blue chip gallery because the crucial bridge in this journey, the crucial bridge of this journey, the mid-tier galleries, the ones where you get a budget, those are all closing. That the art world is stratifying in the same way that the US economy has been for decades. The perilous rope bridge that connected you from having a show at a project space your friend runs to having a show at David Zwirner one day has snapped. Increasingly, all there is now are the scrappiest of project spaces struggling to stay open and the largest blue chip mega galleries gobbling up real estate. There's a lot of reasons mid-tier spaces are closing, and you could do a whole talk about that, but I don't want to focus on that. What I want to focus on is what this new world means for artists. You'll pardon me for a moment. Because what I think this means is that the contract is over. Paying your dues for decades on end to small galleries doesn't mean shit anymore. If the contract is over and there's no longer a path for upward mobility in this debt pyramid version of the art world, then it's probably worth asking, as artists, what are we doing paying into these schools? What gallery jobs are there that these grad programs are preparing us for that could possibly pay back the cost of an MFA, this program notwithstanding? These are questions we should have been asking the whole time, but these are no longer hypotheticals. These are real questions we need to figure out an answer to, because the whole art world thing doesn't work if you can't convince people at the bottom of the debt pyramid that there's a chance to win the lottery anymore. And if we aren't going to be paying into the debt pyramid, what I suggest is that we start investing in ourselves and one another. Like I said before, American artists have always had two jobs: making art and figuring out how to support themselves. For the longest time, we've kind of outsourced the process of how to support ourselves to a series of schools and galleries and museums that we know don't have our best interests as artists in mind. If we can no longer rely on the existing institutions, we're going to have to start making some new ones. My fantasy is obviously that every industry in America becomes nationalized and automated, that we live in a post-work green utopia where everyone is free to make art or do whatever the fuck they want with their spare time after doing weekly Marxist community service. That would fucking rule. But until we can abolish capitalism, we're going to have to at very least figure out how to survive equitably within it. In terms of how to create these new institutions, I definitely don't have all the answers, and I wish I did. But what I do know is that there's a limit to the applicability of institutional critique. There's a point where canceling one billionaire museum trustee so another one can take his place a month later is just reshuffling the deck chairs in the Titanic. What I'm saying is that institutional critique needs to go from being a way to reform and rehabilitate the institutions we have to being the groundwork on which we build totally new institutions. For example, if we know that art school tuition prices are morally wrong and adjuncts receive unfair pay, then the question becomes, how would you go about creating an affordable school where the money goes directly to teachers instead of bloated administrative departments and shady real estate deals? If we know that galleries are subsidized by the precarity of artists they exhibit, the question becomes, how can you create a cooperative gallery model that allows artists to be paid up front? If we know that the luxury price of art inherently invites some of the most morally reprehensible billionaire vampires to fund it, how can we change the pricing of art to allow other classes of people to support and engage with it? The task of being an artist isn't just figuring out what size and color you want your next painting to be anymore. It's also a matter of figuring out new institutions so you can have a place to show that painting and be paid fairly for it. I know people think that I'm cynical and that I'm a nihilistic doomer, but I can assure you I'm not. I'm as sure of the debt pyramid's eventual collapse as I am that building a better art world is possible. It's not cynical to point out that you're living in hell and something needs to be done about it. If you're looking for real art world cynicism, I encourage you to go to an art fair and look into the dead, glassy eyes of an art advisor whose only interest is to be a barnacle on the side of a luxury economy, whose only interest is to be a middleman for the worst parts of the art industry. That's real cynicism. I'm not cynical because I know that I will never be represented by a blue chip gallery. And because of that, you and I are free to make whatever art we want the rest of our lives. As an artist, it's only once you stop believing in winning the debt pyramid lottery that you realize the massive pressures placed upon you to recreate the types of art that are desired by the art world's ruling class of patrons. You are free from needing to hopelessly recreate the work of the winners of history to justify your art's existence. You don't have to make knockoff Georgia O'Keeffe paintings to show at Pace Gallery. You don't have to make knockoff Lewis Morris paintings to show with Simon Lee. You don't have to recreate the paintings collectors like but can no longer afford the original versions of. You don't have to recreate the work currently exhibited through blue chip galleries in an attempt to be represented by one, because you won't be represented by a blue chip gallery. You are free from figuring out how to turn every idea you have into a wall work. I've done so many times. I've done so many of these process-based works where it's like, I plant a seed, and then I grow a tree, and then the tree grows fruit, and then I feed the fruit to my friends as part of a community dinner. And then, at the end of this long, drawn-out process, I take the paper plates from my community dinner, and I staple them to a canvas to sell. Right? You see this all the time. Just grow the damn tree. Just do the thing you want to do. And if people think it's art, if it's not art, then that's fine for them to not think it's art. But there's no need to continue shoehorning projects into wall works for an economy that won't be able to sell these decorative rectangles anyway. You are free from needing to repeat yourself with minor variation until people take you seriously. To satisfy collectors and appeal to blue-chip galleries, artists have made themselves slow, steady investments. I've seen friends of mine spend years of their lives making the same piece 1,000 times, sometimes in slightly different colors, sometimes in slightly different sizes. You can start or stop making a series whenever you want. You can make a new work of art every day. You can make the same art every day. But don't make the same art every day because you think it's a way to impress an imaginary gallery. Do it because it's what makes you happy. And when that stops making you happy, you could do something else. You are free from meticulously building a CV featuring exhibitions at galleries that won't exist in 5 years. I can't tell you how much time I've wasted networking and flattering curators and sucking up to collectors. That's all time I wish I could get back, because the best partnerships you have are with people you earnestly, honestly like being around. And looking back, all those group shows and things I networked so hard to get at, all those shows I thought were so important in the moment, they're all lost in the sands of time. No one cares. No one remembers my CV. All you have are the fun memories of hanging out with your friends after the opening and the ways the work you exhibited helped you progress in your practice to what art you're making today. But the prestige of a group show from 6 years ago does not matter. If you want to be humbled about the long-term meaning of exhibitions, even big ones, open an art forum from a decade ago. Look at all those names. Names you probably don't recognize. Names I probably don't recognize. Hundreds upon hundreds of people who had full-page, $10,000 advertisements in art forum. And a lot of them probably don't even make work anymore. The only good reason to make art is because you like making it right now, and you like making it with the people who are around you. Speaking of, you are free from competition with your peers. There's only solidarity in the assuredness of the art market's continued stratification and eventual collapse. I used to feel such a sense of competition with other artists for spots on rosters and to get included in museum shows and all this stuff. So much so that I can still smell that same scent of competition when I encounter other artists now who wanted the same thing I did back then. It is such an enormously freeing relief to let go of all of that. When you give up on the debt pyramid dream, you realize the necessity of investing in yourself and the people around you. You realize that each one of us are going to have to help each other to create a new path, that we're going to have to create new institutions with each other. Once you realize that, then the artists around you are no longer in competition for the same slice of the pie. You all share a common purpose, which is, oops. I think it showed up as the very first slide. Well, you are free to make art in relation to the time in which you exist. And that's my final slide. And what I have to say about that is that don't worry if something looks like art. Worry if it looks like it could only be made today, October 3rd, 2019, and not any other time in history before that. An artist's job isn't to dutifully go through their lives churning out more and more objects and images in a world that already has enough of that stuff for all of eternity. The artist's job is to find a pattern in all of that static, to find and present some meaning out of the chaos. So the next time you're in the studio, ask yourself, am I making work for myself, for my peers, for the time in which I exist? Or am I making work for an imaginary gallery doomed to exist in the past? Try starting with an existential crisis instead of ending with one, and ask yourself, who the fuck is my audience? And is my work having any impact on their lives? And if you're not happy with that answer, keep challenging yourself to make new work until you are. Thank you.